Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. The long-running and undeclared shadow war between two of the Centre East's most implacable foes, Iran and Israel, appears to be heating up. Iran has blamed Israel for a mysterious explosion at the weekend that knocked out power at its uranium enrichment facility in Natanz. Israel has not publicly said it is behind what Iran calls an act of sabotage, but US and Israeli media reports are quoting officials saying it had been administered by Israel's overseas intelligence, Mossad. Iran has vowed to require revenge at a time of its choosing. This is not an isolated incident. It follows a gradually accelerating pattern of hostile, tit-for-tat actions by both countries as they intensify their covert war while being careful, thus far, to avoid an all-out conflict, which might be hugely destructive for both nations. So what are the risks here, and the way is that this likely to end? This shadow war often broadly divided into three distinct fronts. Iran's nuclear program. Israel doesn't believe Iran's repeated assertions that its nuclear program may be a purely peaceful civil one. Israel is convinced that Iran is secretly working towards developing an atomic warhead and therefore the means to deliver it with a missile. Speaking on Monday during a visit from US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, "In the Centre East, there is no threat that's more serious, more dangerous, more pressing than that posed by the fanatical regime in Iran." Also on Monday, Israel's ambassador to London, Tzipi Hotovely, told the BBC, Iran has never stopped working to develop nuclear weapons and therefore the missiles capable of delivering them. Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons make it a threat to the whole world. With this belief in mind, Israel has been long competing a series of covert, unilateral and undeclared actions to undertake to hamper or cripple Iran's nuclear program. These include the insertion of a bug codenamed Stuxnet, first discovered in 2010. That incapacitated Iran's centrifuges. Earlier this century, a variety of key Iranian nuclear scientists died in mysterious circumstances. Then in November 2020, there was a high-profile assassination near Tehran of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. He wasn't only Iran's leading nuclear technical expert, but he carried a senior rank within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, and Israel believed he was the person running the covert military aspect of Iran's nuclear program. That program is now at a potentially dangerous stage. In 2015, Iran signed up to a multinational nuclear pact called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, which lifted sanctions in exchange for stringent nuclear inspections. But in 2018, President Donald Trump pulled the US out of it, slapping draconian sanctions on Iran, which has responded by incrementally breaking the terms of the deal, most notably enriching uranium, the element which will be used for atomic energy or potentially weapons, beyond the permitted limits. President Joe Biden wants to bring the US back to the deal, but as long as Iran returns to full compliance. Iran is essentially saying, no, we do not trust you, you go first, we'll comply fully once sanctions are lifted. To try to interrupt this deadlock, negotiators from several countries are meeting in Vienna, but Israel doesn't believe the nuclear deal is worth reviving in its current form. Dr. Michael Stevens, a Middle East analyst with the London think tank Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, says recent Israel actions are a deliberate plan to sabotage the nuclear negotiations. The Israelis are unilaterally trying to derail the Iranian nuclear program during a way which, while impressive in terms of technical capability, may be a risky game. First, the Israeli efforts could undermine the US negotiating position because it seeks to re-enter the nuclear effect Iran. But secondly, the Iranians may look to counter through asymmetric attacks against Israeli interests worldwide. Israel has proved it can disrupt the Iranian program, but at what cost? Maritime shipping. Strange things are happening at Stumped recently. Earlier this year, an Israeli-owned cargo vessel, the MV Helios, was badly damaged while transiting the Gulf of Oman. 2 large holes were ripped in its hull and Israel swiftly blamed Iran's IRGC. Iran denied any involvement. In April, the Saviz, an Iranian vessel anchored within the southern Red Sea, suffered damage to its hull, believed to possess being caused by Olympic mines. Israel and therefore the Saudi-led coalition in nearby Yemen believe the Saviz had been serving as a logistic mothership for Iran's Houthi allies in Yemen. Speedboats, machine guns and complicated communication aerials are spotted on board, but Iran says it's there for peaceful, legitimate purposes and blames Israel for the attack. US media reports say that over the past 18 months, Israeli forces have targeted a minimum of 12 ships bound for Syria, carrying Iranian oil and military supplies. Syria and Lebanon. The fact that Syria has been at war within its own borders for the past 10 years has tended to divert attention far away from Israeli military actions there. The war opened the way with an enormous influx of Iranian military advisors from the IRGC working together with Iran's Lebanese allies, Hezbollah, to support the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. In some cases, these IRGC forces have ventured within a brief distance of the boundary with the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Israel has been particularly alarmed at Iran's supply of precision-guided rockets and missiles to its proxies within striking distance of Israeli cities, and it's administered numerous airstrikes against these missile bases and provide lines in Syria, with little perceptible response from Iran thus far. Conclusion: the underlying theme of this shadow war is brinkmanship. Neither side can afford to seem weak, but both Iran and Israel know they have to carefully calibrate their actions so as not to trigger an all-out war. On the nuclear side, it's clear that Israel intelligence has been ready to penetrate Iranian security to an astounding degree, deploying both human agents on the bottom and cyber weapons to beat Iranian countermeasures. On the maritime shipping side, Israel is at something of a geographical disadvantage. It's good access to the Red Sea through its own naval port at Eilat, but further afield, Iran has the whip hand because of its long Gulf coastline and Houthi proxies in Yemen. In Syria and Lebanon, there's always the choice for Iran to deploy its proxies to launch missile strikes against Israel, but this is often extremely risky. Israel has made it clear the magnitude of its response and where it might land in Iran. John Raine, an expert on transnational terrorism with the International Institute for Strategic Studies, IISS, says that Israel's superior intelligence capabilities mean Iran has got to content itself with blunt responses through its proxies. Frustratingly for Iran, its best partner for striking Israel is Hezbollah, but that might be an escalatory move which could embroil Hezbollah with the war Iran wants to avoid. The Iranians usually have the asymmetric advantage, but with Israel, they're being outboxed. The Israelis have both an extended reach, faster footwork, and once they plan to strike bluntly, as they need to be doing in Syria, they hit harder. Thanks for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe.